April 4, 1944, 7,000 meters above southern Poland, a de Havilland Mosquito cuts through the morning sky at cruising speed, its twin Merlin engines humming steadily in the thin, cold air. The aircraft belongs to the 60-photo reconnaissance squadron of the South African Air Force, operating from Foggia Airfield in southern Italy. Inside the cramped cockpit, Lieutenant Chh Bari maintains course while his navigator, Lieutenant I McIntyre, monitors their position over enemy territory. Their mission is routine. The target, the IG Farben synthetic oil and rubber plant near the Polish town of Oswiecim, a strategic industrial complex fueling the German war machine. The photographic camera mounted in the Mosquito's belly fires automatically at precise intervals, capturing vertical images of the landscape below. Every few seconds the shutter clicks, film advances, another frame captured. Neither man knows what is being recorded. Below them, obscured by the industrial haze and the vast scale of terrain visible from altitude, lies something the Allied intelligence community has heard whispers about but never seen. A vast complex of barracks, chimneys, railways and human figures, reduced to microscopic dots on silver halide film. The camera captures it all with mechanical indifference. Rail sidings branching toward rectangular structures, rows of wooden buildings arranged in geometric precision, dark smoke drifting from tall chimneys, the unmistakable infrastructure of mass confinement. The photographs will travel hundreds of miles. They will be developed, catalogued, filed. Photo interpreters at RAF Medmenham in England will examine them through stereoscopes, searching for bomb damage, troop movements, industrial capacity. The analysts will note the factory. They will measure its dimensions, count its buildings, assess its strategic value. They will prepare reports on production capabilities and recommend bombing priorities. And they will overlook the camp. Not because the evidence isn't there. The images are sharp, the details preserved in exquisite clarity, but because no one is looking for it. Because the camera, though it sees everything, understands nothing. Because aerial reconnaissance is trained to identify tanks, not atrocities. Because the machinery of intelligence, like all machinery, only functions according to its programming. The Mosquito banks eastward, mission complete. The film canisters will be sealed, transporting back to base, processed overnight. By morning, the photographs will become part of an archive that will number in the millions. Images of factories, bridges, airfields, rail yards, cities. Evidence accumulated faster than it can be analyzed. Information buried beneath information. The camp below continues its operations. For months, these photographs will sit in filing cabinets, their significance invisible to the analysts who glance at them in pursuit of military targets. The rails, the barracks, the chimneys, all present, all documented, all ignored. The evidence exists, it simply hasn't been recognized yet. It will take 34 years before two analysts sit down with these very photographs and see what was always there. Before the arrows are drawn, the annotations added, the truth exposed. Before the world understands that the Allies possessed photographic proof of the Nazi extermination apparatus while it was still operational. Before the question emerges, if the cameras could see it, why couldn't we? This is the story of what aerial photography revealed about the Nazi camp system during World War II. A story of reconnaissance aircraft flying over sites of mass murder, of photo interpreters trained to identify military targets but not genocide, of evidence captured but not understood, of technology that saw everything and comprehended nothing. Of the moment when, years after liberation, analysts returned to the archives and discovered that the truth had been hidden in plain sight all along. From 7,000 meters, the camera recorded history, but it would take decades for anyone to read what it had written. By 1944, aerial reconnaissance had evolved into one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations of World War II. What began as rudimentary observation flights in 1939 had transformed into a vast, coordinated system encompassing multiple nations, specialized aircraft, and thousands of trained personnel. The Allied Central Interpretation Unit at RAF Medmenham in Buckinghamshire, England, served as the nerve center of this operation, a country manor transformed into a factory of visual intelligence where hundreds of analysts examined millions of photographs under stereoscopes, extracting military secrets from shadows and geometry. The system worked with industrial efficiency. Reconnaissance aircraft, primarily American F-5 Lightnings, British Mosquitoes and Spitfires fitted with specialized cameras, flew missions over occupied Europe daily. The cameras they carry were marvels of precision engineering, German-made Zeiss lenses adapted by Allied technicians, capable of resolving details as small as 30 centimeters from altitudes exceeding 9,000 meters. A single reconnaissance sortie might produce hundreds of overlapping photographs covering dozens of square kilometers. Film was processed within hours. Prints were delivered to interpretation units by morning. The photo interpreters who examined these images were trained specialists. Many were women, members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, recruited for their attention to detail and visual acuity. Section Officer Constance Babington Smith, one of Medmenham's most accomplished interpreters, specialized in aircraft identification. She could distinguish between similar German plane models from subtle differences in wing profiles and fuselage proportions. Her discovery of the V-1 flying bomb program in 1943, identified from aerial photographs of the Peenemünde test site, demonstrated the extraordinary precision these analysts achieved. But their training focused exclusively on military analysis. Interpreters learned to identify tank formations, assess bomb damage, track naval movements, measure factory output. They studied aircraft silhouettes, bridge construction, railway capacity. Their work directly supported operational planning, which targets to bomb, which routes invasion forces should take where German defenses were strongest. Every photograph was examined for tactical intelligence that could save Allied lives or hasten victory. No one trained them to recognize genocide. The Nazi concentration camp system by 1944 encompassed hundreds of facilities across occupied Europe. The largest, Auschwitz-Birkenau in southern Poland, had expanded into a vast complex covering approximately 40 square kilometers. Auschwitz I, the original camp, housed political prisoners and served as administrative headquarters. 3 kilometers west, Auschwitz Roman II Birkenau operated as an extermination center, its 4 gas chamber and crematorium complexes processing thousands of victims daily. Auschwitz Roman III Monowitz and dozens of subcamps provided slave labor for German industry, including the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant that attracted Allied reconnaissance attention. The camp's rail infrastructure alone was massive. A dedicated spur line branched from the main Warsaw-Krakow railway, terminating at a platform between Birkenau's killing facilities. Freight trains arrived daily carrying deportees from across Europe. The selection process occurred immediately upon arrival. Those deemed fit for labor were marched to quarantine barracks. Those selected for immediate death were directed to structures identified on German architectural plans as Leichenkeller, corpse cellars, but functioning as undressing rooms adjacent to the gas chambers. From altitude, all of this was visible: the rail siding, the barracks arranged in rows, the 4 large buildings with their distinctive chimneys, the open pits where bodies were burned when the crematoria exceeded capacity, groups of prisoners visible as dark clusters against light ground, everything documented with photographic precision. Allied reconnaissance aircraft photographed the Auschwitz area at least 30 times between April and December 1944. The South African mission of April 4th captured the first accidental images. Additional sorties followed on May 31st, June 26th, July 8th, August 20th, August 25th, September 13th, and December 21st. The United States Army Air Force flew most of these missions, their primary targets being the synthetic oil facilities and rail marshalling yards supporting German industry. Mission reports noted factory dimensions, bomb damage assessment, reconstruction progress. Some photographs showed Birkenau with such clarity that individual barracks, guard towers, and even prisoner groups were distinguishable. The analysts at Medmenham and the Mediterranean Allied Photographic Reconnaissance Wing examined these photographs according to their training. They measured the IG Farben plant, they counted railway cars, they assessed industrial output, they prepared targeting recommendations. The camp remained peripheral to their analysis: background detail, a housing complex for industrial workers, perhaps a prisoner of war facility. Nothing in their training or operational directives suggested looking closer. The intelligence failure was not one of capability but of context. Photo interpreters possessed extraordinary technical skill but limited broader knowledge of Nazi atrocities. Reports about mass killings had reached Allied governments through various channels: Polish resistance intelligence, escapee testimonies, intercepted German communications, but this information remained fragmented, difficult to verify, and bureaucratically siloed. The systematic murder of European Jews was not yet widely understood as a distinct genocide requiring specific military response. Camps were known to exist, known to be brutal, but their industrial-scale killing operations remained beyond most Allied comprehension. Moreover, Allied military doctrine prioritized winning the war through direct engagement with German armed forces. Resources devoted to military targets were not diverted to humanitarian objectives, however urgent. When Jewish organizations petitioned Allied commanders to bomb Auschwitz's gas chambers or the rail lines feeding the camp, military leaders cited operational constraints, limited bomber range, the need to concentrate forces on strategic targets, the danger of killing prisoners in bombing raids. Whether these objections reflected genuine tactical concerns or bureaucratic indifference remains debated. The photographs capable of proving the camp's true function sat in archives, their significance unrecognized. The breakthrough would come decades later, initiated not by wartime intelligence officers, but by a post-war analyst pursuing historical questions that military priorities had never considered. The process of photographic interpretation during World War II followed precise methodology, a structured approach that transformed raw images into actionable intelligence. Understanding this system reveals both its extraordinary capabilities and its fundamental blindness to anything beyond military parameters. First phase examination, initial assessment. When photographs arrived at interpretation units, they underwent immediate preliminary screening. Analysts worked in pairs, one examining prints through a handheld magnifying glass while another recorded observations. They noted date, mission number, coordinates, altitude, time of day, weather conditions. They identified the primary target and assessed image quality. Was resolution sufficient for detailed analysis? Were shadows revealing or obscuring? Did cloud cover interfere? This phase lasted minutes per photograph. Speed mattered. Intelligence value diminished rapidly. For images covering the Auschwitz area, initial examination focused on the IG Farben plant. Analysts measured building dimensions using calibrated rulers, calculated roof area to estimate production capacity, identified railway connections suggesting material flow. The camp complex adjacent to the factory was noted in passing, marked on target maps as concentration camp or labor camp, but received no detailed analysis. It wasn't the target. Military doctrine demanded focus. Second phase analysis, stereoscopic interpretation. The most powerful technique available to photo interpreters was stereoscopic viewing. Consecutive photographs taken from a moving aircraft showed the same terrain from slightly different angles. When viewed through a stereoscope, these offset images merged into three-dimensional relief, allowing analysts to perceive height, depth, and spatial relationships invisible in single images. Through stereoscopy, flat roofs became distinguishable from peaked, shadows revealed building heights, earthworks exposed concealed positions. Constance Babington Smith used this technique to identify the V-1 flying bomb. By examining stereoscopic pairs of Peenemünde photographs, she detected tiny aircraft-shaped objects on launching ramps, their three-dimensional form revealing them as actual vehicles rather than decoys. The method was extraordinarily effective for its intended purpose. Applied to Auschwitz photographs, stereoscopic analysis would have revealed the camp's spatial layout in precise detail. The height of crematorium chimneys, the depth of excavated pits, the three-dimensional arrangement of barracks, the capacity of rail sidings. Everything necessary to understand the facility's function was present in the images, but stereoscopy only answers questions analysts think to ask. Trained to identify military installations, interpreters examined factory structures and railway capacity. The camp remained background. Third phase documentation, annotation and reporting. Once analysis was complete, interpreters prepared reports accompanied by annotated photographs. They drew arrows identifying key features, added measurements, marked changes since previous reconnaissance. These reports followed standardized formats: target identification, location, description, strategic assessment, recommended action. The language was technical, dispassionate, focused on military utility. Reports on Auschwitz area missions from 1944 described industrial capacity, rail traffic volume, bomb damage to production facilities. Some mentioned the adjacent camp, large prisoner of war installation or concentration camp complex, but provided no detailed examination. The reports fulfilled their intended purpose, supporting bombing campaign planning against German industrial targets. They contain no mechanism for recognizing or reporting genocide. The interpretive framework, what training permitted seeing. Photo interpreters operated within a cognitive framework shaped by training, doctrine, and mission objectives. They learned to recognize military significance, defensive positions, troop concentrations, supply depots, transportation networks. Their expertise lay in decoding the visual language of warfare, the shadows that indicated camouflaged vehicles, the patterns that revealed underground bunkers, the subtle changes suggesting recent activity. This framework was remarkably effective for military intelligence. Medmenham analysts correctly predicted German responses to Allied invasions, identified secret weapons development, guided bombing campaigns. Their work saved thousands of Allied lives, but the framework excluded anything beyond military parameters. Camps housing civilian prisoners fell outside the interpretive system. Even when visible, they remained invisible, not because the images lacked clarity, but because the analytical structure couldn't process them. The women of Medmenham, capability without authority. An often overlooked dimension of wartime photo interpretation was gender. Women comprised a significant portion of Medmenham's analytical workforce, recruited for their visual acuity and patience for detail-oriented work, yet they operated within a male-dominated military hierarchy that constrained their analytical scope. Female interpreters could identify aircraft and assess bomb damage with extraordinary skill, but their observations were filtered through supervisory structures that determined which findings merited further investigation. Some historians have speculated whether female analysts, had they been permitted broader interpretive authority, might have recognized signs of civilians suffering more readily than male colleagues focused purely on military targets. The question remains unanswerable. What is certain is that the interpretation system's rigid focus on military objectives left no space, regardless of interpreter gender, for recognizing the systematic murder unfolding in plain view. The evidence that wasn't sought. By September 1944, Allied photo reconnaissance had documented Auschwitz-Birkenau with sufficient clarity to reveal its primary function, had anyone looked. Photographs from August 25 showed prisoners in distinctive striped uniforms being marched from the rail platform toward crematorium buildings. Images from September 13 captured smoke rising from open-air burning pits. December photographs documented the camp infrastructure with extraordinary detail: guard towers, barbed wire perimeters, gas chamber ventilation systems, railway configurations designed for rapid unloading of human cargo. Every element necessary for understanding was present. The interpretive framework prevented recognition, the methodology was sound, the mission was wrong. The particular sequence of photographs that would eventually expose Auschwitz's true function was captured on August 25, 1944, during a mission targeting the IG Farben synthetic oil plant. The mission, designated sortie number 60 PR694G, launched from Foggia airfield in southern Italy at 09:23 hours. The aircraft, a Lockheed F-5B photographic reconnaissance variant of the P-38 Lightning, carried two vertical K-17 cameras loaded with 9-inch film, capable of capturing images from altitudes exceeding 8,000 meters. The pilot, whose name remains documented only in mission logs, flew a standard reconnaissance pattern, approached the target at high altitude to avoid anti-aircraft fire, begin photography several kilometers before reaching the objective to establish approach documentation, maintain steady course and speed over the target area to ensure consistent image overlap, continue photography past the target to document departure routes and secondary facilities. Standard procedure. Executed hundreds of times across occupied Europe. At 11:47 hours, flying at 8,200 meters altitude, the aircraft passed over the Auschwitz complex. The cameras fired automatically, controlled by intervalometers calibrated to produce 60% forward overlap between consecutive frames. Over 90 seconds, the cameras captured 14 photographs covering approximately 30 square kilometers, the IG Farben plant, rail infrastructure, surrounding agricultural land, and the Birkenau camp complex. The mission encountered no enemy resistance. Weather conditions were optimal: clear skies, good visibility, minimal ground haze. Temperature at altitude measured -38 degrees Celsius. The pilot noted routine procedural details in the mission log. The cameras functioned correctly, film advance mechanisms operated normally, all systems performed as designed. The aircraft returned to Foggia at 13:12 hours. Total flight time 3 hours 49 minutes. The pilot debriefed with intelligence officers, confirming target acquisition and satisfactory coverage. The film canisters were removed from the aircraft and transporting to the photographic laboratory for immediate processing. Within 6 hours, the film was developed, cut into individual frames, and printed onto photographic paper. Initial prints measured 23 by 23 centimeters, large enough for preliminary examination but requiring magnification for detailed analysis. The photographs were exceptionally sharp. Resolution permitted identification of objects smaller than 50 centimeters. Every detail captured by the cameras was preserved in the prints. The photographs were assigned reference numbers, logged into the archive system, and forwarded to the interpretation unit at the Mediterranean Allied Photographic Reconnaissance Wing headquarters. They arrived for analysis on August 27, 2 days after the mission. Standard turnaround time for non-urgent reconnaissance. At the interpretation unit, a team of 3 analysts examined the photographs using standard procedures. They worked in a dedicated photo laboratory equipped with light tables, stereoscopes, measuring instruments, and reference materials. The primary analyst examined each photograph individually, identifying the factory complex, measuring visible structures, noting railway traffic. A second analyst used a stereoscope to examine overlapping pairs, assessing the three-dimensional relationship between buildings and confirming measurement accuracy. The third analyst prepared written reports and annotated prints. Their analysis focused entirely on the IG Farben facility. They documented blast furnace positions, measured storage tank capacity, counted rail cars in sidings, assessed recent bomb damage, and recommended priority targets for future bombing missions. Their report, completed on August 28, consisted of 4 typed pages with 3 annotated photographs. It provided precise intelligence about German synthetic fuel production capacity. The camp complex visible in the photographs received minimal notation. One analyst wrote in the margin of a working print, "PW camp." The question mark indicated uncertainty about the facility's exact purpose. Prisoner of war camp seemed a reasonable interpretation. The notation went no further. The report submitted to operational commanders made no mention of the camp at all. It wasn't relevant to bombing priorities. The photographs were filed in the archive under IG Farben Works, Auschwitz. Within days, newer reconnaissance images arrived from subsequent missions. The August 25 photographs joined thousands of others in filing cabinets, evidence preserved but significance unrecognized. Years later, when analysts finally examined these photographs for historical rather than military purposes, they would discover what had been visible all along: groups of prisoners being marched from rail platforms toward low buildings emitting smoke, open burning pits surrounded by dark figures, the geometric precision of an industrial killing facility captured with photographic clarity, proof that Allied cameras had documented genocide in real time. But in August 1944, none of this was seen. The mission was successful, the intelligence was useful, the report was filed, operations continued. The transformation from unexamined archive to historical revelation began 34 years later in 1978, when CIA photo interpreter Dino Brugini sat in his office at the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C., contemplating a question that had haunted him since childhood. What did the Allies know about Auschwitz, and when did they know it? Brugini was uniquely positioned to pursue this question. Born in 1921, he had served in the Army Air Force during World War II, working in photographic intelligence. After the war, he joined the CIA in 1948, eventually becoming a founding member of the National Photographic Interpretation Center, established in 1961 to analyze intelligence imagery from reconnaissance satellites and high-altitude aircraft. His work analyzing Soviet missile installations during the Cuban Missile Crisis had demonstrated the extraordinary power of aerial photography to reveal concealed threats. By the late 1970s, approaching retirement, Brugini possessed both the expertise to analyze historical aerial photographs and the institutional access to retrieve them from classified archives. The question of Auschwitz had personal resonance. His family had lost relatives in the Holocaust, but his approach was analytical, driven by a photo interpreter's instinct that if the camps existed, they must have been photographed. He began searching through World War II reconnaissance archives, specifically missions flown over southern Poland between 1944 and 1945. The archives were vast, poorly indexed, and contained millions of images. Many photographs had never been examined beyond their original wartime analysis. Brugini searched systematically, identifying missions that flew near known camp locations, requesting archived negatives, examining them with the advanced photographic equipment available in 1978. The breakthrough came when he located the August 25, 1944 photographs. Examining them under high magnification, Brugini immediately recognized what wartime analysts had missed. The camp's true function was visible in the images, not through any single detail, but through the accumulated pattern of visual evidence that photo interpretation training taught him to recognize. He saw the rail siding terminating at a platform between 2 large rectangular buildings. He saw groups of people, reduced to tiny dots at high magnification, moving in organized lines from the platform toward these buildings. He saw smoke rising from tall chimneys. He saw open pits surrounded by dark areas indicating disturbed earth. He saw the spatial relationship between these elements, a system designed for rapid processing of large numbers of people arriving by rail and proceeding directly to buildings from which smoke continuously emerged. Brugini knew the history of Auschwitz by 1978. He understood what these buildings were. What struck him was how visible the evidence had been. This wasn't concealed or camouflaged. The entire operation was laid out in plain view, documented with photographic precision, preserved in archives for 34 years. He contacted his colleague Robert Poirier, another experienced photo interpreter, and together they began systematic analysis of all available Auschwitz photographs. They identified 32 separate reconnaissance missions between April and December 1944 that had captured the camp. Using modern photographic enhancement techniques unavailable during the war, they created enlarged prints showing extraordinary detail. They annotated the images with arrows and labels identifying specific structures: gas chamber and crematorium II, gas chamber and crematorium III, the rail platform known as the ramp, prisoner barracks, SS administrative buildings, open burning pits. Their analysis produced irrefutable visual evidence that Allied aircraft had repeatedly photographed Auschwitz during its period of maximum killing operations. The photographs documented the systematic murder of Hungarian Jews between May and July 1944, approximately 440,000 people killed within 8 weeks, with such clarity that the smoke from burning bodies was visible in multiple images. Brugini and Poirier prepared a detailed report, published by the CIA in 1979 under the title The Holocaust Revisited, a retrospective analysis of the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination complex. The report included annotated photographs, technical analysis of the camp's layout, and historical context explaining the facility's operations. It was a landmark document, the first systematic application of modern photo interpretation to historical questions about the Holocaust. The publication sparked immediate and intense debate. Historians, Holocaust survivors, and military analysts confronted painful questions. If the evidence existed, why wasn't it recognized? If Allied aircraft photographed the gas chambers, could they have bombed them? Would destroying the killing facilities have saved lives? Why did trained photo interpreters overlook such obvious evidence? The answers were complex. Military priorities during wartime focused on defeating German armed forces, not on humanitarian intervention. The concept of genocide as a distinct crime requiring specific response was not yet fully developed. Photo interpreters, however skilled, could only find what they were trained to seek. Institutional structures that might have connected scattered intelligence about mass killings, Polish resistance reports, escapee testimonies, intercepted communications, aerial photographs, did not exist. Yet the photographs remained undeniable. They documented with mechanical objectivity the reality that Allied reconnaissance capabilities had captured evidence of the Holocaust while it was occurring. The cameras had seen, the film had recorded, the truth had been preserved, but it took 34 years and a photo interpreter asking questions the military never considered for anyone to recognize what had been visible all along. The immediate response to Brugini's revelations was profound and unsettling. The publication of The Holocaust Revisited in February 1979 generated international attention. Major newspapers covered the story. The photographs were reproduced worldwide. Holocaust survivors confronted visual documentation of the camps where they had lost families. Historians gained unprecedented evidence for understanding the extermination process. The debate over why Auschwitz wasn't bombed reignited with renewed intensity. Some survivors expressed anger that the Allies possessed photographic proof but took no action. Others noted that bombing the gas chambers might have killed prisoners. Military historians debated whether precision bombing in 1944 could have effectively destroyed the facilities without massive collateral casualties. The arguments raised fundamental questions about the relationship between military strategy and humanitarian intervention, questions that remain relevant today. What became clear from Brugini's analysis was that the failure to recognize the camp's function was not a simple oversight. It reflected systemic limitations in how wartime intelligence organizations processed information. Photo interpretation, however sophisticated, operated within narrow parameters defined by military objectives. The analytical framework that made Allied reconnaissance so effective for targeting German military infrastructure rendered it blind to civilian suffering occurring outside those parameters. The women and men who worked as photo interpreters during the war were not culpable for this blindness. They performed their assigned duties with extraordinary skill under intense pressure. Constance Babington Smith's identification of the V-1 flying bomb prevented countless civilian casualties in London. The targeting intelligence produced by Medmenham analysts shortened the war. Their work saved Allied lives. But the system within which they operated was designed for military intelligence, not humanitarian early warning. The photographs themselves entered multiple archives after Brugini's publication. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum acquired copies, making them available to researchers and educators. Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust memorial, incorporated them into historical exhibitions. Universities and documentary filmmakers used them to visualize the camp's operations. The images became foundational evidence for understanding the systematic nature of the Nazi extermination program. Beyond their historical value, the photographs established precedent for using aerial reconnaissance in documenting human rights violations. In subsequent decades, satellite imagery would expose ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, genocide in Rwanda, mass grave in Iraq, detention camps in North Korea. The methodology Brugini pioneered, applying modern photographic analysis to historical questions about atrocities, became standard practice for human rights investigators. Organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch now routinely use satellite imagery to document violations, provide evidence for international tribunals, and pressure governments through visual proof of their actions. Technology has advanced dramatically since 1944. Modern reconnaissance satellites can distinguish objects smaller than 10 centimeters from altitudes exceeding 400 kilometers. Multispectral imaging reveals concealed features invisible to traditional cameras. Automated analysis algorithms can scan millions of images, identifying patterns human analysts might miss. Yet the fundamental lesson from Brugini's discovery remains: technology alone is insufficient. Recognition requires looking for what matters, not just what is visible. The photo interpreters of World War II looked for military targets because that was their mission. Modern analysts examining Syria, Sudan, or Myanmar look for evidence of mass atrocities because we have learned through the painful revelations of Auschwitz photographs that documentation without recognition is meaningless. The cameras see everything. We must decide what to look for. 30 years after liberation, a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau stood in an exhibition hall looking at an enlarged aerial photograph of the camp where she had been imprisoned. The image, taken from Brugini's collection, showed the camp with such clarity that she could identify the specific barracks where she had slept. She could see the rail platform where her family had been separated. She could trace the path she had walked from selection to quarantine. She had never seen the camp from above. During imprisonment, her world was measured in meters, the distance from barracks to roll call, from work detail to latrines, from one day to the next. The aerial view revealed spatial relationships she had never comprehended. The camp was vast, geometrically organized, designed with industrial precision. From ground level, it had felt chaotic, incomprehensible. From altitude, its logic became clear: a factory engineered for murder. She told an interviewer that the photograph helped her understand something she had struggled to explain for decades. The camp wasn't chaos, it was system. The cruelty wasn't random, it was designed. The aerial photograph, captured by a camera that understood nothing, nevertheless revealed the truth she had lived but couldn't see. This is perhaps the deepest lesson embedded in these photographs. They document not just historical facts but the inadequacy of individual human perception. The pilots who flew these missions saw nothing. The prisoners who suffered below could see only their immediate torment. The analysts who examined the photographs saw only military targets. It took decades, distance, and deliberate effort to recognize what had been present. All along, the photographs remind us that evidence and understanding are not the same thing. The Allied reconnaissance system during World War II was technically sophisticated and operationally effective. It captured millions of photographs with extraordinary precision, but it remained blind to genocide because blindness was built into the system. No one was looking for what mattered most. Today, when satellite imagery reveals detention camps in Xinjiang, mass grave in Ukraine, or refugee crises at borders, we face similar challenges. The technology is vastly superior. The images are clearer. The recognition of human rights violations as matters requiring international response has evolved. Yet institutional inertia, political constraints, and bureaucratic priorities still determine what is seen and what remains overlooked. The pilots who photographed Auschwitz in 1944 completed their missions successfully. The photo interpreters analyzed their assigned targets effectively. The military campaigns proceeded. Victory was achieved. But the cameras also recorded evidence of history's greatest crime, and that evidence sat unrecognized for 34 years because no one asked the right questions. History often concentrates on the loudest moments: battles, invasions, speeches, and frontlines, but some of its darkest truths unfold in silence, inside places no one was meant to see. And sometimes those truths are captured by cameras that see everything and understand nothing, waiting in archives for someone to finally look and recognize what was always there. The aerial photographs of Auschwitz are not just historical documents, they are evidence of the distance between seeing and understanding. They remind us that the most important truths may be hidden not because they are concealed, but because we aren't looking for them. They challenge us to ask, what are we overlooking today that future generations will wonder how we possibly missed? The cameras still fly, the images still accumulate. The question remains, are we looking for what matters?